I still remember the exact moment when the silence stopped feeling ordinary and started to feel dangerous. For 2 weeks, my phone had stayed quiet. At first, I told myself Daniel was busy. Work could do that to a man. A demanding project. Long hours at the office. That was the rational explanation. But deep down, I knew better. A mother always knows when the silence is more than busyness. It presses on the chest. It wakes you at night. It tells you something is terribly wrong. Each morning, I tried to brush it aside. I poured coffee, stared out the kitchen window, dialed his number again. No answer. I left little messages, soft words I hoped would bring him back to me. I sent texts that never delivered. Day after day, my worry grew heavier until it felt like a stone lodged inside me. I tried to be logical, tried to believe I was overreacting. But there is a point where instinct drowns out reason. Mine was screaming at me. On the 10th day, I stopped pretending. I packed a small bag, slipped on my thickest coat, and boarded a bus to Cleveland. The ride stretched long and gray. Outside the window, winter fields blurred past, frozen and lifeless. Inside the bus, I sat rigid, hands clasped tight in my lap. Stomach knotted so tightly I could hardly breathe. I thought of Daniel's laugh, of his weekly calls that had once been so steady, like clockwork. I thought of my grandson, Leo, and how his little voice used to bubble through the phone in the background. Where were they now? The closer we drew to the city, the heavier my chest became. The bus rattled through neighborhoods I did not know. But my eyes stayed fixed on the glass, my reflection pale against the streaks of melting snow. Every bump in the road jarred me back into the same thought. Something was waiting for me at the end of this ride. Something I could not avoid. When the driver finally called out the stop near Daniel's townhouse, I stepped into the wind. It sliced through my coat as though I wore nothing at all. I walked up the street, heart pounding harder with every step, until his house came into view. The windows stood dark, the porch coated with ice. I climbed the familiar steps and stood there, my breath clouding in the cold air. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and that old instinct rose sharp inside me. I knew before I even touched it, something was very, very wrong. And that was the moment, standing at the threshold, when I realized I was about to walk straight into the darkest chapter of my life. The first thing that struck me as I reached Daniel's townhouse was the silence. The street was hushed under a thin layer of ice, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I climbed the front steps slowly, my boots crunching against the frost. Every movement weighed down by the knot in my chest. When I wrapped my hand around the doorknob, I felt it give beneath my touch. The door swung open without resistance. My stomach dropped. Daniel never left his door unlocked, not with Leo in the house. That single detail told me something was terribly wrong. I stepped inside, and the chill of the night followed me in. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with something sour, as though the house itself had been holding its breath too long. The living room looked as though a storm had ripped through it. The sofa was shoved out of place, cushions scattered like debris. A mug lay shattered across the floor, its ceramic shards catching the dim light. Dark stains trailed into the carpet, and I felt my throat tighten at the sight. My legs wavered, but I forced myself forward, whispering Daniel's name into the stillness, as if the walls themselves might answer, room by room. I climbed the staircase, my hand gripping the banister to steady the tremor in my body. The upstairs hallway stretched long and quiet, doors open like hollow mouths, I looked into each room, hoping for a simple explanation, a misplaced toy, a light left on. But every space was empty, stripped of comfort. With every step, the dread in me grew heavier. When I reached Leo's bedroom, I paused in the doorway. The room was too neat, too still. The air weighted with something unspoken. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, low and steady, coming from beneath the bed. My chest constricted. My first instinct was to turn away, but I forced myself closer. My knees wanted to buckle, but I leaned against the desk for balance. My voice cracked as I whispered his name into the shadows. Slowly, I bent and peered under the bed frame. There he was, my grandson, curled in on himself, thin as paper, his hair matted, his cheeks hollow. In his small hands, he clutched an empty plastic bottle as though it were his only lifeline. His eyes stared wide and vacant, past me, past everything. The sight froze me in place, my hands shaking so badly I was afraid to reach for him. I stumbled back, heart pounding, fumbling for my phone with trembling fingers. My voice barely held as I called for help, every word breaking against the weight of terror. Minutes later, red and blue lights flared against the windows, and 2 officers hurried inside. I led them up the stairs, each step heavier than the last, knowing this was only the beginning of a nightmare. And as they crouched to lift Leo from his hiding place, I realized we were stepping into a chapter darker than I had ever feared. The ride to the hospital blurred into sirens and flashing lights. I sat in the back of the cruiser with Leo pressed against me, his small body frighteningly light in my arms. I kept whispering his name, fanning his face with the edge of my coat, praying for a sign that he could hear me. The officers drove fast, their voices clipped and urgent. I remember clutching his empty plastic bottle in one hand because he would not let it go, even in his weakened state. When we burst through the hospital doors, a rush of bright lights and sharp smells swallowed us. Nurses hurried forward, their hands quick and steady, lifting Leo from my arms and placing him on a gurney. I stumbled after them, my heart hammering. Their voices were calm, but urgent words like dehydration, malnutrition, trauma. Every syllable struck me like a stone. I pressed my hand against the wall just to keep myself upright as they wheeled him into a room filled with machines that beeped in uneven rhythm. From the doorway, I watched them work. Tubes, needles, quiet commands. His eyes stayed open, wide and unblinking, but they were empty, as if he was staring past all of us into a place I could not reach. I called his name softly, hoping to anchor him back, but nothing changed. The boy who once laughed endlessly now lay motionless, clutching that bottle as though it were the only thing keeping him tied to this world. As the hours dragged on, I sat in the waiting chair, my coat pulled tightly around me, trying to quiet the fear spiraling inside. That was when the detectives returned. Their faces carried the weight of news I did not want to hear. One of them explained in a grave voice that they had gone back to Daniel's townhouse, this time with chemicals to illuminate hidden traces. Under that light, a large pool of blood appeared across the living room floor. Too much blood to mistake. Too much to hope. I felt my breath leave me. The word homicide floated in the air, and I nearly collapsed under its weight. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles whitened, willing myself not to fall apart. And then, as if he had heard every word, Leo stirred for the first time. His small hand tugged at my sleeve, his eyes filling with tears. After days of silence, his fragile voice cracked the air. He whispered that his dad was gone. Just 3 words, but they shattered everything. I gathered him into my arms, rocking him gently as sobs shook his small body. My tears mingled with his, my heart breaking open with a grief I could not contain. I held him tighter, knowing this was only the beginning, and that the truth waiting in his memories would change everything. Leo's voice came out like a whisper carried on a fragile thread. At first, it was scattered pieces, broken thoughts that I had to piece together with patience. He told me about the storm that night, the rain lashing against the windows, the doorbell ringing again and again. Daniel had looked through the peephole, his face drawn tight with worry. And then he had turned to his little boy and told him to crawl under the bed, to stay hidden, no matter what happened. I could almost see it, the urgency in his movements, the way he pulled the comforter down low, shielding Leo with the only protection he had left, his instructions. Leo's breathing grew shallow as he spoke, as though the memory itself was too heavy for his small body. He remembered her Sabrina. She wasn't alone. A tall man came with her, a shadow in the doorway, dripping rain onto the floor. The storm raged outside, but the real storm began inside. Voices rose, demands, accusations. Daniel's steady calm against Sabrina's sharp anger. Leo said his father claimed he had nothing left to give, that she had already taken too much. And then it shifted. The tall man shoved Daniel once. He staggered, but stayed on his feet. Another shove came harder, the kind that isn't meant to scare, but to break. Leo said he heard a crack. I didn't need him to describe it further. My imagination filled in the sound of my son's head striking the corner of the table. He fell, and he didn't get back up. From under the bed, Leo froze. He told me he wanted to scream, to run, but he stayed silent because his father had told him to. He listened as Sabrina's voice cracked with panic, as something heavy scraped against the floorboards, as the storm outside masked the sound of a body being dragged. He waited in the dark, heart pounding, convinced that if he stayed quiet long enough, his father would rise again. But he never did. Hearing those words from a child's lips carved something out of me I can never get back. The image of my grandson pressed against the floorboards, trembling in silence while his world collapsed, is one I will never shake. My sorrow deepened into outrage. How could a mother do this to her own child? How could betrayal run so deep? As I held Leo close, I knew there had to be more to the story than rage and violence. There was a reason behind her cruelty, something darker waiting beneath the surface, and I vowed to uncover it, no matter how painful the truth might be. The detectives called me back into the small, windowless room at the station. Their expressions alone told me I would not like what I was about to hear. I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for the words that followed. They explained that Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy, a large one worth $500,000, and the sole beneficiary was Sabrina. For a moment, my mind refused to process it. My son, who had worked double shifts to keep food on the table, who had gone without new shoes so Leo could have the best, had left behind a safety net for his family. He had done the responsible, loving thing. And that gift, that act of selflessness, had been twisted into the very weapon used to destroy him. I remember shaking my head, whispering to myself that it couldn't be true. Daniel believed in family. He believed in commitment. He thought he was securing his son's future, not signing his own death sentence. My heart ached with the thought of him carefully filling out those forms, probably relieved that, no matter what happened, his wife and child would be cared for. He never imagined that the woman he trusted would cash in his life like it was a ticket to freedom. Anger began to rise in me like fire catching dry wood. I pictured Sabrina's face, the way she used to smile at family dinners, pretending to be devoted. And then I remembered Leo, small and fragile in that hospital bed, abandoned by the very person who should have fought for him. How could a mother trade her child's father for money? How could she let her son waste away in silence while chasing a payout? I thought of Daniel's laughter, his patience when teaching Leo how to ride a bike, the way he always carried groceries with one arm so his son could cling to the other. Every memory cut deeper, because now I knew they had been betrayed. He wasn't taken by chance or fate, he was taken by greed. Sitting there, I felt the sorrow harden into resolve. Sabrina had reduced my son's life to a dollar amount, but I would not let her reduce his memory too. I would carry his love, his kindness, and his sacrifice into the courtroom. And I would make sure justice was served, no matter how long it took or how much it cost me. As I left that room, I held on to one thought: she had stolen my son, but she would not steal his legacy. The fight was only beginning, and I was ready to face her in court. The courthouse felt colder than I expected, not because of the air, but because of the weight that pressed against every wall, every seat, every face. When I walked in holding Leo's small hand, I could feel how tense his body was. He leaned into me, and I whispered to myself that no matter what happened, I would stand by him. We sat in the front row, so close I could see the polished wood of the judge's bench and hear the shuffle of papers as the lawyers prepared their cases. My heart pounded steadily, every beat echoing the thought that this was the moment justice would finally meet truth. The prosecutor began with the evidence. One photograph after another was displayed, each one reopening wounds I thought could not get any deeper. The living room where Daniel had once read bedtime stories to Leo was now captured with bloodstains highlighted under harsh lights. The shattered mug, the displaced furniture, the faint drag marks, all preserved as proof of the violence that had stolen my son from me. My breath caught as the images passed, and I held tighter to Leo's hand. Then came the video footage. Grainy, distorted by rain, but unmistakable in its story. A dark pickup truck parked outside Daniel's home, waiting, idling like a predator ready to pounce. Minutes later, it drove away, a long shape hidden under a tarp in the back. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to keep watching. My son's absence was in that truck. The courtroom was silent when the prosecutor announced the next piece of evidence: Leo's recorded testimony. The sound of my grandson's fragile voice filled the room. I felt him tense beside me, and I wrapped my arm around him. His words, broken and hesitant, described the night Daniel pushed him under the bed, the voices that followed, the crash as his father fell. There was a collective gasp as the reality of a child witnessing his father's death sank into everyone present. Tears blurred my vision, but I did not let go of Leo. He had survived, and I needed him to know he was not alone. Across the room, Sabrina sat, her posture stiff, her face a mask of denial. But as the evidence piled higher, her composure began to crack. Then it happened, an eruption I will never forget. She leapt to her feet, her voice sharp and breaking. She admitted she hadn't meant to kill him, only that she needed the money. The courtroom erupted in shock, the judge banging for silence, and beside her, the man who had helped drag my son's body turned to her with fury, spitting out words that laid the blame back at her feet. In that chaos, the truth shone clearer than ever. When the judge finally read the verdict, the air seemed to hold its breath. Guilty, first-degree murder, insurance fraud, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplice, guilty of accessory, sentenced to 20 years. My chest ached as the gavel struck, but for the first time since the stormy night that had shattered my world, I felt a sliver of release. Justice had spoken. I looked down at Leo. His eyes were wet, his body trembling. But when he leaned into me, I knew he felt it too. The storm had broken. As we walked out of that courthouse, cameras flashing and voices shouting questions, I had nothing to give them. My only focus was the small hand gripping mine. Together, we stepped into the daylight, battered but standing, ready to face the long road of healing that waited ahead. When I turned the key in Daniel's townhouse for the last time, the click echoed like a farewell. The rooms were stripped bare, the laughter gone, the walls heavy with memories I could not carry anymore. I closed the door, not just on a house, but on a life that had been torn apart. With Leo's small hand wrapped in mine, I chose to step forward, not back. Bringing him home to my quiet town felt both comforting and terrifying. The familiar streets, the church bells on Sunday mornings, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, these were pieces of my world. But to Leo, everything was foreign. His silence was louder than words. At night, he would jolt awake, his body trembling, his eyes wide with shadows I couldn't see. I would sit beside him, whispering that he was safe, that I would never leave him, even as my own heart cracked open with helplessness. Therapy became part of our rhythm. Watching him in that small room, clutching a stuffed bear as the therapist guided him gently, I saw glimpses of the boy he might become again. There were days he didn't speak at all, and days when a single smile felt like a sunrise breaking through clouds. I learned to celebrate the smallest victories the first time he asked for water, the first time he reached for my hand without fear, the first time he fell asleep without flinching at every creak of the house. Our routines grew slowly, like fragile vines clinging to life. Breakfast together at the same spot by the window. Walks in the park where he would watch the ducks circle the pond. Evenings where I read him stories, though I often had to stop, my throat too tight with the weight of what he had lost. Each moment stitched us closer. Two wounded souls trying to make something whole again. Still, there were nights when I sat alone after he had gone to bed, asking myself if love was enough to heal what had been broken. And then I would remember Daniel, his warmth, his humor, his endless devotion to Leo. I realized that every hug, every whispered reassurance, every effort to build a safe world for Leo was not just my fight. It was Daniel's legacy living through me. Healing is not quick. It is not neat, but it is possible. I see it in the way Leo's laughter sometimes slips out unexpectedly, in the way he leans against me when he is tired, in the way hope returns slowly, like spring after the longest winter. If this story has touched you, I ask you to hold your loved ones closer, to cherish the ordinary moments, because they are the foundation of everything. Share this story, comment your thoughts, or pass it along to someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, love really is the strongest thing we have left, and the only thing that can carry us forward.